me and that I saved, or to listen to the stories I asked them to tell me and that I recorded. And that a small part of me is still like a little kid and is mad at them for not being here anymore, even as the rest of me knew that they had to go. Or that in many ways that I didn't quite expect, it feels like they're still here. So, our parents were a lot like you, a lot like your parents. They were like regular people in a lot of ways. They got married, they had a couple of kids, they worked hard, they retired, they traveled, got older, they watched a lot of Family Feud, did a lot of Sudoku, they loved Louisiana food, they grumbled about the news and really grumbled about dumb plot twists in their favorite Hindi and Bangla series. One of the reasons you're here is because our parents died, kind of during COVID and stuff. So Dad died in August of 2021 at the age of 92, and Mom died last November at age 88. They were both born in Burma, now known as Myanmar. Both sets of grandparents immigrated to Burma from what's now Bangladesh when the whole region was under British rule. And I didn't realize this, but they were actually the youngest in both their families. And I always think the younger children, like my brother, are braver, and maybe that's one of the reasons that they came to the United States. They met at Rangoon University, and they married in 1963. Dad was Mom's physics tutor. But I guess he did a good job because she passed her classes and became a doctor. But the previous year, a military junta had taken over in Burma, and Mom and Dad decided to leave Burma in the 1960s. So they came to Southern California in 1971 with me as their 6-year-old daughter and their 4-year-old son. Dad eventually got work as a civil engineer that he was trained to be. Mom got recertified to practice medicine in the US and began working as a pediatrician. And their lives took them to New York City, Louisiana, Ohio, Maryland. And in the end, they returned to where most of their friends were, like many of you. They returned back to Louisiana, where the spicy food and the humid weather and the big brown river must have echoed something of Burma and India. So those are the key facts of their lives, but it's the details that keep coming at me. I just feel like I'm at the edge of a shore, and it's these waves, like this tide that is relentless, with memories about them. I think about how during the Japanese occupation of Burma during World War II, Dad had to go to Japanese schools in Rangoon, where he picked up the language, and that would be the 5th language that he spoke in his life. And he would run into Japanese tourists, and this Indian guy would start speaking Japanese to them, and they'd be like, "That's really weird." And walk away really fast now. And I remember Mom telling me that when the Allies flew air raids to take Burma back from the Japanese, that she and her family ran into the jungle around their home in Daunji up in the hills to flee the bombs. I think about how Mom and Dad met when Dad was tutoring her. She really did not like that Neela Banerjee at first. He was loud, he rode fast motorcycles in American cars, smoked, played soccer, and ran around with his friends. But his family in Rangoon always welcomed my mom and her older brother on weekends and holidays because my mom's family home was far away. And my mother, who, as many of you know, was kind of a tough nut to crack, she kind of came around to Neela Banerjee. Our parents had a love marriage and not an arranged one, and they got married after Dad returned from an engineering training program in the UK and this whirlwind travel in Europe. It was only years later when I was in India that a much older cousin told me that this was something of a scandal. So this cousin and I were riding in a rickshaw, and he asked me, he goes, "Do you know what your father did when he came back from Europe?" And I cringed. I thought, what did Dad do? Oh God, what are you going to tell me now? I don't want to know family secrets. And so he said, my cousin said, he bought your mother a watch, a Rolex from Switzerland, and they weren't even married. Okay, I know where the Rolex is, it's fine. So there was a lot of joy, as you could see in the pictures, from marrying and starting their own family, but that was against the backdrop of this repressive authoritarian regime that only got worse over time. So the Burmese junta wanted to drive out people who were ethnically different, so they stripped away the property rights and other rights of the Indians and Chinese who'd lived there for generations. So my parents lost their home when they applied for exit visas to immigrate. They lost their work. They fled to the United States without any jobs to go to, without any money or valuables, which were confiscated by the Burmese state. and more than $15,000 in debt in today's dollars for the plane tickets. So years later, Dad and I were in Maryland. We were sitting in this exam, or a medical exam room, waiting for a doctor. And it was in those quiet moments in the last 15 years when I learned really essential things about them. And I found myself asking Dad, why did you leave Burma? And he said very deliberately, I left because I did not want to live in a place where the government told my children what to think. And if that's why you leave a place, you don't stay quiet and meek in your new country. So Mom and Dad were grateful for the freedom and opportunities that life in the United States gave them, but they were never going to be the timid immigrants that people expect of us Asians. So when Mom worked in hospitals and clinics before starting her own practice, she went, she was like this petite little woman, she went toe to toe with older male physicians and lots of patients who found it hard to believe that that little lady in the sari with the accent was actually a doctor. And my dad used to do this thing, oh my God, it embarrassed me so much, but now I realize I am him. We had this neighbor in New York City where we lived, right, upstairs, we were on the first floor, it was an apartment building. And we used to call him Gorilla because he was like really loud, and Dad would take this broomstick and bang the ceiling, and there would be these little divots in the ceiling. I'm like, oh my God, Dad. But then, I was just like, well, I'm like him. Like, I tell people what I think, even if I don't have a broomstick to hit places. But the main thing that I saw in their lives and thinking about their lives is that they were determined to build here and build and build. Mom started this pediatrics practice with a great staff and friends in Luling. Louisiana, was home to them for decades, and her practice made her something of a town institution. Dad started an engineering business that's still going today. But the things they wanted to create weren't just limited to their careers or our small immediate family. They were the first ones in their own families to come to the US, so they brought their siblings and families here too. Dad worked with Bengali parents in Queens to set up Bengali language classes. We moved down south soon afterwards, but those classes continued. And Mom and Dad were at the core of the Bengali community here that expanded over time. They helped organize religious and cultural events, and eventually helped open a Hindu temple here. I remember their dinner parties, which many of you attended, and there was delicious food and lots of conversation. They went really long, and then afterwards, everybody would gather in their den and play music and sing, and people brought their harmoniums and their tabla, and it was just wonderful. They moved to Maryland in 2006 to be near Radha and me, and I couldn't have raised such a happy, smart, funny daughter without them nearby. She gave them so much joy, and I could see that they gave you a lot of joy too, sweetheart. It was wonderful to be around the three of them. They were always up to antics, and they were always basically allied against me. So Mom and Dad returned to New Orleans in 2016, mainly to be near their friends. That was one of the lessons I came away with. And their lives got quieter and smaller, which I guess was bound to happen. So about a year or two before Dad passed, he, literally out of the blue, would start talking about how grateful he was for the life he led. This is not a thing that like you see the stereotype of Asian families, just out of the blue saying, I'm just so grateful. And he was so surprised, and it was in that way, when you shake your head a little bit because of the dumb luck you've had, you just can't quite believe it. And he was surprised that he'd lived so long, that he'd come from a really humble family in Burma, and he'd made a good life for himself in the country he immigrated to when he was almost 40 years old, that he loved his wife, who was still by his side, that he had kids who'd done well, and a granddaughter who was the absolute apple of his eye. So there are a lot of things that I think about with my folks, and sometimes my head feels like this overstuffed house, with too much in it and too many things to reach for. But I think that the greatest inheritance when I think about their lives that I've gotten is the sense of gratitude. The gratitude to be born to them and the chance to walk this earth, to be born to two such brave people who took a crazy leap to leave all that they knew on the edge of middle age to come to this country, for teaching me and Joe and Radha to build and build and build. Not just my own life and home and accomplishments, but those things that extend outward from us: friendship, community, a world that we should make better than we found it, even in the small radius of the lives, even the small radius that our lives occupy. So to me, that is their legacy, that gratitude. And I can't think of a better legacy than that. And now Radha's gonna have some comments for you.
are a bit shorter than my mother's, but that was beautiful. So, as Neela and Eboodi's only grandchild, I've always been spoiled rotten by them since I was born. When my mother gave birth to me, they moved from New Orleans to right outside of Washington, D.C., where I grew up to be closer to our family. From the first time I was capable of remembering anything at all, I knew nothing but love and sweetness from my grandparents. My Dida would always cook delicious food for me, and I'm pretty sure she continued feeding me by hand until I was about 8, long after I had learned to feed myself. Whenever they would pick me up from school, she would be waiting for me in the backseat of the car so she could sit next to me, and always had a caramel in her purse for me. My dadu would let me watch all my cartoons on the TV, like the little tyrant I was, but only during the day, or so our formal agreement goes. In theory, he was supposed to be able to watch his Bollywood shows at night, though somehow he always let me watch my shows for a little longer than I was supposed to, especially if it was Tom and Jerry. He really loved Tom and Jerry. They were both such large parts of my childhood, and always so loving and so generous and so playful. I would always be excited to go to Dadu and Dida's house, whether it be to play restaurant with my Dida or decorate my Dadu's bald head with stickers. But more than that, they are the reason I was able to have the childhood I did or even exist at all. When I got older, my Dadu started telling me a bit more about what life was like for them back in Burma and when they had first gotten to the US, things that my mother has described for you all. How difficult it was to exist in the repressive regime in Burma and then to struggle to adapt to American culture and find work. What they gave so that my mother and my uncle's lives could be easier than theirs and mine easier still. Never fails to strike something deep inside of me. I live safely, I live happily, I'm able to stay in my home and speak my native language with my friends. I'm able to get a higher education. None of that would have been possible without the undoubtedly terrifying choices my Dadu and Dida made long before I was born, with no plan B and no safety net. I miss both of them terribly. Their smiles, their hugs, their stories, and I can only hope that now I am making them proud wherever they are. I'm taking Bengali classes at the University of Michigan where I attend. I think they would like that. And I promise not to squander the gift of the better life they have given me, and to always treasure their memory close to my heart. I will tell my children their stories, tell them about their sacrifices, and how, sorry Mama to you being a future grandmother, but I may have had the best grandparents in the world. I love them very dearly, and I miss them very dearly.
Because I can hear myself. I sound as dumb as I look sometimes. Anyway, so food is available, which is why everyone's really here. So, but I'm going to give a couple of short anecdotal speech, I think, just to get everyone rolling on this. And what we'd like is to pass this mic around. You give it to Diane Gobert over there, and she's going to tell a story about Mom. And then maybe it'll work its way around the room, and everyone can tell, or not, stories about them. Because this isn't just about Mom and Dad, it's about, in a way, a celebration of the community that they helped found here, Bengalis. Everyone who's here, was either, one of the original Bengali families. There were like eight of us, right? Or came here because they were related to one of those families, or came later and found that there was a community here for them to be accepted to. So, when I think about I came back here in 2018 to sort of help them out and help transition them out of this life. So there was a lot of sadness, but I don't want to focus on like the sad moments. One of the nice things though that came out of that time was that my father finally sort of, either he gave up treating me as a child or he just said, these stories need to be told before I go. He told both of us actually, but told me a few really fascinating stories. Neela talks about them coming here in 1971, for example, but his initial visa opportunity was in 1968, and it was a third preference. I don't know if I'm getting this right, so those of us who came here on immigrant visas, please don't correct me. He had third preference to work for NASA on the, doing the civil engineering for the runways at Cape Canaveral. And for reasons regarding the family and some other things, couldn't make it. So they lost, really in the 3 years, it was, Neela says they lost their jobs and everything else. They were surviving on mom's private practice. Luckily she had private practice. And so in 71, when they came, with all this debt, Dad came first. And he had no job. He just had the visa. He was looking for a job. And he was running out of money, and he felt running out of time because, we were supposed to come soon, and how was he gonna sort of afford to keep us all, clothed and fed and everything else? So, sort of at a point where he had just been rejected for yet another job, he went on a day that he didn't have, any interviews or any opportunities that he saw coming up. Was waiting to hear on a few things. He took a bus up to the Hollywood Hills to a Hindu temple, Kali temple, and he prayed, and he said, what have I done? What kind of mistake have I made with my life that this is happening to me? And he said, please, God, give me this one thing, and I'll be a good man for the rest of my life. He got on the bus, went back to his apartment in Culver City, which was back then not a nice place. And the next day he got a job offer to punch holes in sheet metal on a midnight shift. And he had at least a foot in the door. And that's the kind of story that embodies their lives in many ways. They didn't have a game plan. They had a game plan, I think, in 1968. But by the time, 71 had rolled around, it was very, broken backfield. I'm sorry, football metaphors here. And scrambling. So they, we moved around a lot, and we had a lot of upheaval, but we also met so many wonderful people. Dad, traveled, but when he settled here, finally after, when I was in college, he founded Ames Group. That legacy lives on. Mom's practice, was around for almost 30 years. And in her final days, I met so many people in the medical profession who remembered her, who got into the medical profession because of her, who worked on, child abuse cases with her, who worked on, family issues with her. And they all, remembered Dr. Banerjee. So they both left a mark. They left a mark within the Bengali community and also in the larger New Orleans community. And that's, I think how we want to remember them. I have a bunch of other stories to tell. Maybe I'll tell them later, but what I'd like to do is give the mic over to Diane, and Diane, after you, I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here, but anything you want to tell, and then, we'll pass it around, and, if it comes back to me, maybe I'll have another story to tell. Sorry.
I met Dr. Banerjee the first day he came to St. Charles Parish, to our hospital. And yet we didn't have a pediatrician either. So she was so kind and everything. And I saw this little lady in the lobby. She looked kind of lost too. And I was working as medical records director, and we became friends. And we became sisters, you know, because she was just so good, you know. And I would be able to take her around, you know. And then too, she cooked a good lamb. I didn't get any lamb otherwise. But she was such a kind person, and she built that practice up to no end. And I would go there after work, you know, and visit with her. And that's how I became her sister. But she was well liked there. And it was a hardship when she retired and left the practice. Because, like I say, we had no pediatrician, you know, in those days. That was in the 70s. Yeah, we were both young too, you know, at this old age. But I want you to know that she was a beautiful person. You know, I don't know of anybody who said anything bad about her. She was well loved, you know. And we had to remember her birthday too, you know. We forgot one time, and oh, that didn't go over well. But I loved her to no end, and I really miss her right now, you know. So, Joe, somebody take over, please.
Would you like to say something?
Respect to both Neela and Eboodi. In my life here in Louisiana, I would say right from the first time I came back from Chicago, Neelda Eboodi was a tremendous stimulus for me to see how established she was, to see how kind she was, not only to her patient, and there are times if we did something wrong, she was not hesitant to tell, hey Chilai, Vaishali, that probably would not be the way. Okay, Eboodi, I understand you. And I was more close to Neelda because in many religious ceremonies, I will be on her side, chanting Gita, Chandi, these are some of these books like you will tell. And I enjoyed it totally well. So I would say that Neelda and Eboodi, both Vaishali and I tremendously miss you. Not only your love and affection and your guidance.
I met, because Mr. Banerjee, Neil Banerjee was elder to me, we referred to him as Neil Da, which is a short form of elder brother. And so was Ibu Banerjee, and we called her Eboodi. And we probably knew them for about close to 30 years. And Neelda became the president of an organization that I'm the president today. It's called the Louisiana Bengali Cultural Association. And he was one of probably the first ones there, and it was quite a large, we had a large Bengali community here, and I myself, I was known as the trash man because he instructed me to pick up the trash. But I had no problems, and Neela had some of his nephews who was looking for some employment in a ship management company. I was an ex-employee there, so I tried to help him. What I'm most grateful, very grateful, is the blessings he bestowed on my children. And thankfully, and every time my wife or me, we would speak to him, he had a phenomenal memory. He recalled their names, and he knew what they were doing. Thankfully, one of them is a doctor. So he was always very effusive in his blessings, and I'm so thankful eternally for that. Eboodi was somebody who she was like a frail doll to me. She was so beautiful, and I would never shake her hand. I would kiss her on her cheek. She was so beautiful. And I just, what can I say? Such is life. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is P.K.Roy, and I knew Eboodi and Neela for a long time. They were really wonderful people and helped out in the LBCA community, doing all kinds of services. And the biggest thing that I do remember about Eboodi is she was so loving. Whenever she would see, she would just plant her hands on my cheek and give me a big hug. And that's what I remember all the time. And both Neelda and Eboodi, because they were from outside, like from Burma, they had this affinity about everybody should learn their mother tongue. And they did help us a lot in having this Bengali school with Oshinda and Anjana and some of these people who were teaching our kids Bengali. And so to this day, because of that, our children are all speaking Bengali, even though they don't have anybody here who could teach them that. And I'm very thankful for that, and I'm thankful to Eboodi and Neelda. And the funny thing was, my kids didn't know that Eboodi's name was Ibu. So that's how they used to call her Eboodi Jeti. So her name became Eboodi Jeti. So anyway, I'm going to just end here saying there were some wonderful people who did some wonderful things for our community. And thank you very much.
By the way, food's
Well, I was lucky enough to meet Neil and Neelda Eboodi in 1990 when I went to work for Neil in what later became officially Ames Group. When I started with Neil, I was in my early 20s, and I know you hear a lot of people joke about having work wives and work husbands. Neil was a work father for me. Neil helped raise me through my 20s and into my early 30s, and basically set me up for the success that I've been able to have by continuing on Ames Group and building it into something that I think he would be really proud of. Ibu, I loved her to death. We didn't interact as much as Neil and I did, obviously, but anytime something was going on with my daughter or my wife with any kind of illness, Ibu would call and always show care and concern. And Neil has always been like a second father to me, and someone that I've held in the utmost respect and have loved, and I'm so glad that we have had this opportunity to give them the proper honor of their life and every way they've touched everyone here, and I'm grateful for that.
My name is Deepankar, and I think almost everyone in not only the Bengali communities, but all the Indian community knows me because I am the musician for everyone. And I have all my equipment, and I have never had to cook on weekends. I'm in someone's house or someone's events. But I want to thank you on my behalf and probably everyone else for the way you share all those things with us and show some new light and to remember him much longer. Thank you so much. And I am your alma mater is University of Michigan. Thank you so much.
Any more takers?
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today. Lunch is ready, and it's a buffet style, yes? So, please go ahead and serve yourselves. And there's also, if you need help, like if you want us to make a plate for you, just, grab Radha or me, or, Maddie, just let us know, and we can pull it together for you. Thank you again for joining us today. It's really good to see a lot of familiar faces from all the chapters of our lives. Okay. Please, bon appetit. Thank you.